it's with a heavy heart that I rise to inform members of my resignation as Speaker of the House of Commons. It has been my greatest honor as a parliamentarian to have been elected by you, my peers, to serve as the Speaker of the House of Commons for the 43rd and 44th Parliament.
That's a long bit from the resignation speech Tuesday from Canada's Speaker of the House of Commons, Anthony Rota. Rota quit after he invited a 98-year-old former Ukrainian Nazi soldier living in his riding in North Bay, Ontario, to attend last week's historic visit to Parliament by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. As you've heard, Rota pointed out the elderly man sitting in the public gallery. He called him a Canadian hero from the Second World War who had fought in Ukraine against the Russians, and the lawmakers gave the man 2 standing ovations. It only came out later, thanks to reporting from the Jewish news outlet Forward, that the man is more likely a war criminal who had served with the Ukrainian Nazi unit called the 14th Waffen-SS, which historians say not only helped murder Jews in the Holocaust, but also committed massacres against Polish civilians too. Needless to say, there has been resulting outrage from Jewish groups and Holocaust educators, as well as from Canadian politicians of all sides who called on Rota to resign. And now they're calling for further efforts to find out how this sort of huge international embarrassment could have happened. Not just because it's a stunning lack of research on Rota's part, but it also damages Canada's credibility on the world stage. Experts say it also hurts Ukraine, who Canada supports to the tune of billions of dollars in civilian and military aid.
So it'll gird Russia in its ongoing invasion of Ukraine. It will be used as a wedge in the information war in the West to try and weaken the resolve and resilience of those countries and NATO members who are supporting Ukraine in its struggle against the Russian invasion.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Wednesday, September the 27th, 2023. Welcome to the CJN Daily. We're a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News, sponsored by Metropia. Rota's resignation as Speaker is effective Wednesday night, but it isn't the end of the scandal by far. Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly has already reached out to her Ukrainian counterparts to try to smooth things over there. Meanwhile, it looks like the Polish government is opening hearings to try to get the 98-year-old veteran extradited from Canada to face war crimes charges in Poland. The Abraham Global Peace Initiative has asked the RCMP to open an investigation into how the man was allowed into Canada after the Second World War in the first place. And according to reports, some 2,000 Ukrainian Nazi Waffen-SS soldiers were admitted. So to make sense of how this could have happened and what needs to be done to fix things, we're joined by Artur Wilczynski. He's had a long career in the Canadian civil service, over 30 years, including as an assistant deputy minister. He has top-level security clearance. The Ottawa Insider was also Canada's ambassador to Norway, and he headed Canada's delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. He joins me now from Ottawa, and just keep in mind, we spoke before the Speaker, Anthony Rota, resigned. Well, we're speaking a few days after the president of Ukraine made his first ever in-person appearance in the House of Commons in Ottawa and toured Canada for a day, drumming up support. You were where on Friday watching his speech to the House of Commons?
I was at home. I turned it on. It was, from my perspective, it was a historic occasion that the president of Ukraine was here, where we were talking about our alliance. It was coming on the heels of his visit to the United States. Where issues are important and this is a key Canadian foreign policy objective. So for me, it was as a political buff and someone who's done years in diplomacy and security, for me it was an important event. So I sat down on my couch, turned on the television, and watched the speech and watched the members of parliament and all the guests getting up and giving President Zelensky regular standing ovations, where he spoke about his struggle against the illegal invasion by Russia of Ukraine. And then after the speech, when the speaker of the House of Commons then gets up and recognizes an individual, and he described them as a 98-year-old World War II veteran who then fought for the independence of Ukraine against Russia. And I was like, I mean, for me, that was an immediate alarm bell because, understanding the history of that region, those sentences immediately point to an individual that was fighting against Russia, and people who were fighting against Russia were invariably members of the Nazi supporting forces. And I kind of thought immediately, somebody must have checked. So this must be somebody who maybe was in a partisan group of something that was different. Somebody must have checked. And in retrospect, it is mind-boggling that this kind of fundamental error, even though it may have been innocent in terms of its origin, like, maybe he didn't know, but there's a whole thing to unpack there about the fact that he didn't know. But the effect that it's had on members of the Jewish community, on other victims of Nazism, on Canadian veterans and their families who sacrificed in the fight against Nazis. This has been a real devastating kind of development. There needs to be, I think, a thorough examination of what happened. We need to understand both the domestic and global effect of this blunder.
You mentioned that a deep dive needs to be done, an investigation, but as your experience has been with Global Affairs Canada and in the Diplomatic Corps, what is the normal process when foreign diplomats or foreign dignitaries come to an official state visit, even when you were an ambassador, and the vetting process that gets done to these sort of guest lists?
So this is unfortunately complicated. In normal cases, when, for example, an event takes place outside of Parliament Hill, when they organize, for example, the president's visit to Toronto, and they have a number of guests that are there, that those lists are vetted by both the Prime Minister's office, by PCO, by Global Affairs, to make sure that there are no issues. The Parliament is different because Parliament is separate from the executive. And I think a lot of people are having a hard time understanding, how this could happen because of that. So when there is an event in the House of Commons, there is a public gallery, as folks know. The Speaker does have complete discretion in terms of what they want to say about those individuals in the gallery. And my experience is that there is a tension sometimes between the Protocol Office of Global Affairs Canada from a diplomatic perspective and the Protocol Office from the House of Commons. That, the Protocol House of Commons usually tells GAC, thank you very much. Our turf, don't mess with us in terms of what we want to do. That said, I think that they needed to be far more open to a conversation. And I think that the Prime Minister's office and Global Affairs should have been far more insistent in terms of knowing exactly how things were going to unfold. The conflict today and between Ukraine and Russia is multidimensional, and the propaganda war and the information war is a central part of it. And the narrative around the current Ukrainian government and is laden with Nazis has been an absolute feature of the Russian propaganda war against Ukraine, and has been also a general propaganda war against the West, including Canada, that we are mollycoddling and supporting Nazis. So there should have been an absolute sensitivity to that, and there should have been an openness on the part of all actors to be incredibly vigilant, knowing that the consequences of that lack of vigilance would be what we are seeing today, which is an absolute, I think, public relations disaster for Canada, not just for the Speaker. This is something that Canada is wearing, and that is why I think that there should have been greater collaboration, and that we need to look at how we avoid this in the future, because this is a learning moment, I think, for all Canadians, and specifically for the House of Commons and for the broader public service.
In general, when politicians do these glad-handing, photo ops when they're out and about, for example, 3 members of the Federal Conservative Party had lunch with a far-right supporter from Germany, and it was a big kerfuffle, and they never resigned, and it was a big deal. And then, it was like, well, we couldn't have known. I mean, it's a Leith Marouf affair all over again for the Liberals, because all you have to do is Google his face and his name to this 98-year-old gentleman, and you would have been able. Why doesn't anyone use Google in the federal civil service? Both sides, Liberal and Conservative.
So this is I don't think the civil service did a Google search. I mean, I because this was, again, in this case, I think that the issue should have been, why didn't the speaker do it? There's an entire infrastructure that supports the speaker in exercising their responsibilities and duties. The speaker has also constituency staff. The rationale that the speaker used was, this was a constituent. I was trying to be nice to a constituent. Well, your constituency staff should have Googled this person to try and better understand, exactly who the speaker was honoring. And even, like I said, the language that the speaker used in the introduction of this individual should have raised alarm bells for the speaker. Because if he had known the history, as I said, he would have said, "Whoa, hold on a second. This is possibly problematic. I should probably check about this with other actors to make sure that I am not doing something that will embarrass the government of Canada, embarrass the office of the speaker, embarrass the Parliament of Canada, and embarrass all Canadians." But I don't think that the public service or the PMO had advanced knowledge that this person was going to be acknowledged in the gallery.
So what do you think the ramifications for Zelensky and Canada's standing as one of their financial and military backers has been affected by this?
Well, I think that this gives a real boost to Putin and his regime. It gives him propaganda value, information, warfare value that he will be able to use, and that his proxies will be able to use both domestically in Russia, where they will be able to use this to, quite frankly, garner greater support and sort of point to, see, we told you this is a fight against Nazism. And that has incredible, powerful effect on the Russian population, for whom the Great Patriotic War against the Nazis is a massive motivating factor in terms of their behavior. This has real effect. And I think that that's why we need to understand and look at this from a mitigation perspective for what it actually has done. Not just sort of say, oops, well, the way things work in Canada is that Parliament is separate, and we need to respect those differences. No one's questioning that. No one's saying that the speaker doesn't have or shouldn't have the authority to do what he did. But the speaker needs to make sure that they have the information they need in order to mitigate any potential risks, reputational risks, real security risks. We're talking in Canada about right now about foreign interference and how hostile actors are using various diaspora communities potentially to amplify malevolent and intentions. So we need to be, I think, even more vigilant from a security perspective as well. We don't know how rigorous the vetting was by the Parliamentary Security Service for this incident, where President Zelensky is here, a person who is, a very high target of the Russian state, a state that has not been shy, for example, in extrajudicial killings and assassination attempts. Just ask our good friends from the United Kingdom about Skripal and Litvinenko.
Are you saying that somebody whispered into Rota's ear that was with the Russian diaspora misinformation to put this guy in?
No. Let me be very clear. No, I don't think that's what happened in this case. I think, though, that we have to understand how hostile state actors work. Even though the risk or the likelihood of that would have been low, the consequences of it potentially happening would have been high. I think that there would have been a responsibility for the Sergeant at Arms of the House of Commons to talk to the Speaker to say, look, we don't necessarily have the tools necessary to mitigate the kind of risk that is surrounding this type of event. Therefore, we need to work in far greater collaboration with all of the actors organizing this event, including Global Affairs, including the RCMP, including the Prime Minister's office and the Privy Council office. All of those actors should have been managing this really, really tightly. And the fact that this incident happened raises questions, right? Maybe they did work together, but maybe nobody asked the right questions. And
Well,
I
maybe
think
they don't understand history properly. Maybe they haven't spoken to the Jewish community, the Holocaust community. This is a whole bigger issue of the Ukrainian government's never dealing with its history about its participation as collaborators in the Holocaust, and also, massacring of also non-Jewish Poles. So that's a whole other story, which Canada has not dealt with either. There's 2 or 3 monuments to these former soldiers that are still here in Oakville and in Edmonton, and they never have dealt with that and refuse to take them down. So that's a whole other issue that Canada hasn't, ever handled properly, despite the Jewish groups asking for them to take it down for years.
100%. And I think that lack of Holocaust education, the lack of understanding of what happened on the territory of Ukraine, and how collaborators with the Nazi regimes in Germany and the invaders into Poland and into Ukraine and to the Soviet Union over that time, the role that they played in the Holocaust. I think that lack of understanding, and knowledge of history has absolutely contributed to this this incident. And having Canadians understand this so that we don't provide these kinds of propaganda wins, these own goals that we've scored against our own interests because of a lack of understanding of that history.
2 things. Should the Speaker, Anthony Rota, resign as Speaker?
So my thinking has actually evolved on this. I thought that his recognition relatively quickly of his error was sufficient. But I think now the answer is no. I think he needs to resign, right? But I do think that it doesn't only rest on the Speaker. I think the Speaker resigning is I think the bare minimum. But I do think that the government, as the entity representing the Canadian people, the entity that invited the president of Ukraine here, should be forthright and sort of publicly say this was an error. We will work with the institutions within our appropriate kind of jurisdictions to make sure this never happens again, and we will work as hard as we can to mitigate the global effects of this blunder, because again, they are real, and I think Canadians and our allies deserve that kind of very serious recognition on the part of the government of Canada.
On the Monday, the rep of the Liberals in the House, Karina Gould, who got up and said, we're going to expunge it from Hansard so that it's wiped out from the official record. How does that sit with you? Is that an appropriate response after what you just said?
So no, absolutely not. And it's I actually tweeted about that it's appalling form of historic revisionism. The irony of there being a level of historic revisionism of a bad thing that happened as it relates to the Holocaust. I mean, it's just like it compounds the nonsense, right? Of course, it should stay in the official record. It should not be expunged from any official record of Parliament or of the video. It needs to stay. What it needs to be accompanied by is an apology that has happened. It needs to be accompanied by the debate in the House of Commons about what the consequences of this are, because that historic record is absolutely essential for us to draw lessons. So I did not understand why that was, like, who thought that would be an appropriate response? It just, for me, and I'm not a religious person, man, but like on Yom Kippur to boot, to where we're supposed to recognize and the things that we have done wrong in the past and find ways to find the right path moving forward. The irony for me as a Jew was, like, I just didn't understand how this could be the governmental response. So I don't think that helped in any way, and I'm hopeful that the historic record stays unimpinged or unmodified, and that we use it as a learning opportunity about a number of things. One, that carelessness has consequences, that ignorance has consequences, and that there's a deep value in Holocaust education and in commemoration that needs to be deepened, not diluted as time moves on and we lose survivors to time.
I think we've covered it. Is there anything that you want our listeners to understand?
I think that I understand people's anger. I was angry. I understand people's profound sadness and disappointment at what happened, and I understand people's wish for accountability. I think that this is complex, and I don't want this to be a partisan issue. There's a lot of trauma that I think can be compounded if this becomes a partisan question. And I don't think that turning this into a question of partisanship will help address either the domestic harm caused by the incident or the global harm. I think that this is a time for us to come together, learn from it, and do better the next time.
Jewish groups say the story isn't over by far. The Canadian Society for Yad Vashem says this shameful event further proves that more work needs to be done with Holocaust education and remembrance. And B'nai B'rith, Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Canada, and CIJA all want Ottawa to release the full unredacted files from the Deschênes Commission. It was a royal commission set up in 1985 by former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney into how many Nazi war criminals were living in Canada. Only part of the report was ever published, and since then, Canada has revoked the citizenship or tried to deport a total of maybe 4 suspected Nazi war criminals, but most died of old age before their fates were finally decided. Here's Richard Marceau. He's a vice president at CIJA.
Following the Deschênes Commission that was put together by Brian Mulroney in the 80s, there was a creation of War Crimes Unit. The Deschênes Commission came out in I believe in 1986. There's lots of scholarly work that came out after this. A lot of new facts came to light, and I think, and I not only do I think, I call on the Canadian Justice Minister to task his War Crimes Unit of Justice to investigate and look into the presence of Nazi war criminals in Canada. We have a chance of last kick at the can. Those men mainly should not live tranquil lives and quiet lives in Canada when they were part of a killing machine that killed so many Jews.
That's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, sponsored by Metropia. Integrity, community, quality, and customer care. To end the show, I wanted you to hear what it sounded like in the House of Commons Tuesday when Karina Gould, the Liberal House leader and a granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor from Auschwitz, had to answer questions on the whole affair from the opposition. The Prime Minister was away in Toronto attending an outside event, and so here is Conservative MP Tim Uppal of Edmonton first, and then Gould's reply.
Canadians learn more about the horrors of the Holocaust, but never did I imagine that in this same House of Commons, a Nazi would be invited and honored in this place. Mr. Speaker, when will the Prime Minister stand up, take responsibility for this massive insult, and apologize to Canadians?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
My family walked into Auschwitz, and only my grandfather and great uncle walked out. Never in a million years would I have imagined that the Speaker of the House of Commons would invite someone who fought for the Nazis to this place and to recognize him in front of everyone and to ask us all to stand. We all placed our trust in the Speaker. It was broken. We are hurt by this. I personally am incredibly hurt by this, because never in my life would I have ever done this had I known otherwise, and I assure you that no other member would have done that either. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thanks for listening to the CJN Daily. As always, we love your feedback and your comments. We're at ebessner@thecjn.ca.